All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a pretty powerful sermon called As in the Days of Noah. And what it does is diagnose our modern world, but through a very ancient lens. So right out of the gate, the sermon hits us with this foundational prophecy. It's immediately setting up this direct parallel, basically saying, hey, if you want to understand the future, you've really got to understand the past. And that, of course, raises the central question the whole sermon is trying to answer. It suggests that maybe what we think we know about that time, well, it might be missing the point. The real story, it argues, holds a critical warning for all of us today. Okay, so let's dive into this first section. This is where the sermon claims that the root of the problem back then wasn't what you'd probably expect. It wasn't some big external chaos. It was something much deeper. To make its case, the sermon points directly to this verse from Genesis. And the argument is that the corruption that led to the flood, it didn't start with violence or war. It started inside, with the inclination of the thoughts of his heart. So here's the key takeaway the sermon is driving at. The massive physical judgment of the flood was really just a response to a spiritual crisis. A crisis of our thoughts, our imagination, what the text calls an idolatry born in the mind. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The sermon translates this ancient problem into modern terms. It's saying, look, back in Noah's day, the idols were physical things, carved from wood and stone. But today? Today's idols are abstract concepts, things like ambition, power, or even technology. And we carve them not with our hands, but with our will. Okay, so from here, the sermon builds on this idea to analyze, well, us, our behavior. It uses this really powerful analogy from the Torah to explain how all this internal corruption actually plays out in society. All right, so to really grasp the sermon's next point, we got to take a quick look at this concept. In the ancient ritual on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the community's sins were symbolically placed onto a goat. And then that goat, the scapegoat, was driven out into the wilderness to carry those sins away. And this is where the sermon makes a pretty bold connection. The argument is, we're basically doing the exact same thing today, just psychologically. We deflect our own responsibility, we cast blame on other people, and we create enemies to carry our own guilt far away from us. And this next part is just a brilliant piece of wordplay to drive the warning home. It takes that modern slang term, goat, for greatest of all time, and connects it right back to the original scapegoat's fate. The sermon is warning that the very people we celebrate and elevate as our goats might just be headed for that same desolate wilderness. So after laying out the problem, this internal idolatry and our tendency to find scapegoats, the sermon then pivots. It starts talking about the solution, and it finds that solution embodied in the character of Noah himself. And to kick this off, the sermon just lays out these direct parallels it sees with our world today. It paints this picture of a society completely distracted, where technology is glorified over wisdom, and wealth is idolized over righteousness. And the argument is, even if the churches are full, people's hearts are far from God, or Elohim, as the source text here puts it. But then, right in the middle of all that chaos, the sermon drops this one simple verse. Amidst all the corruption, one person stood apart. The text says Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahuah, which is a specific Hebrew name for God. And the question the sermon raises is pretty obvious. Why? What made him so different? And the answer, according to the sermon, is really interesting. It wasn't because he did something spectacular, no. It wasn't because he built the ark or because he preached warnings to everyone. Instead, the sermon says his special status came from his internal state, from his relationship, from what the text calls his walk with God. And that is presented as the only true path to safety. And that brings us to the sermon's conclusion, its final warning, its real call to action. This whole analysis isn't meant to be just a history lesson. It's framed as an urgent message for right now. So, to wrap it all up, the author brings back that powerful metaphor of the flood. The floodwaters, well, they represent this impending judgment. The idols of the heart are all that internal corruption we've been talking about. And the ark is presented as this path to safety that's still available, but only if people are willing to turn back and tear down those internal idols. And it all ends with this final, provocative challenge from the Gospels. There's no neat little bow on top. It just leaves the interpretation and the choice of how to respond squarely in your hands.